When will the NCAA set Daryl Jackson free?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Brian Smith. I am your host here at Locked On Seminoles, and thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. And to that point, please subscribe and like this podcast. I'm doing another bonus episode here today on a Sunday, but it's something I've waited on and I haven't talked about in any way, shape, or form on social media or anything else. And that's the Darrell Jackson saga. And to put it mildly, it's a little disheartening. And I've got some things up here, as you can see, what the NCAA has done, what history Florida State has, and what Daryl can do, etc. But when you don't take care of somebody that is looking out for their mother, and that's a little prelude to what we're getting ready to go into here, but it's a pretty wild story, and it's even gotten to the point it's political. So it is rough. With that, before we get going, LinkedIn Jobs, this is our sponsor today. Thank you to them for being with us. Like many people, I know what it's like to try to hire people. I've tried to hire interns, other people to work with me, going through other agencies, finding qualified candidates for anybody. It's just not very easy. In today's world, it's a very thin line with the margins. The economy's tough. People are always looking for an edge. The best way to get it is to find a candidate for you. I'm no different than the people listening to this podcast. You have to have really good candidates. And quite honestly, LinkedIn is one of the best in the business, if not the best. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Again, it's not easy for me either, but please note that this is only something you're going to help yourself with if you get into it a little bit earlier to prepare. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your jobs for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, let's talk a little Daryl Jackson here. As you most likely know, the NCAA has, at least for now, not given Daryl an opportunity to play this year for Florida State. Here's the quick rundown on where he's been, what he's done, etc. He's from just outside of Tallahassee originally, signed with the University of Maryland, played there, or redshirted, whatever, in year 2021. Transferred to Miami last year, played, we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second, 2022. So there's this transfer, the normal one that the NCAA grants. However, he transfers to play for the Noles, and he's looking for a waiver because he has an ailing mother up near Tallahassee. Pretty simple, really. The new rule on whether or not they're going to let a second waiver take place or transfer, however you want to say it, that's not easy to get into, but it was very odd that he applied for this 2 days before the rule went in about, and I'm not going to get into the legal jargon here. He applied for it 2 days before, 2 days. They even brought this rule into effect, but yet they're using the rule and he can't play. First off, that's legally, I'm thinking that's not very good business. Two, it's for his freaking mother here. This is not hard. It's for a family member that he needs to help. It's not like this kid just wants to go to Florida State and be close to home and go party and be crazy. He's doing it for a family member for the right reasons. So NCAA, why haven't you allowed Jackson to come to Florida State and be eligible this year? The NCAA waiver was that process that they have going on right now about whether they decide 2 days difference. Second, it's for a good reason. It's the normal cause. It makes no sense. So that is really bunk, in my opinion. And I'm very surprised that there hasn't been more support about this nationally, but it's starting to get there. I'm going to read a little bit from a few of my buddies at Noel Game Day. They put out a quote that's pretty interesting. Florida Chief Financial Officer Jimmy Petronas, he took a look at the Jackson situation, and this is a quote they put in their article about it here recently. This is one of those things where it just drives me nuts. But I'm writing to express my sincere disappointment in the National Collegiate Athletic Association's recent denial of Florida State University defensive tackle Daryl Jackson Jr.'s hardship waiver. As a Florida State alum and father of two, when I came across Daryl's story, I've got to admit, it got me emotional. After all, Daryl put his family first and transferred to FSU to be closer to his ailing mother. Pretty succinct, honest, and direct. There's more, and we could go on for days, but the point here is still the same. If you are going to grant somebody, and there's been all kinds of waivers that are yes and all kinds that are no, there are a handful I get why they deny. But I have tried, because I followed college football and basketball forever, I have tried to think in my lifetime, if there hasn't been a situation like this, where a kid, like his mom needs help, grandmother, something of that nature, where there wasn't more consideration. When you have people from the state legislature here in the Sunshine State talking about this young man on their behalf, and there are other politicians and stuff in this article and others. I just picked one because that was a really good quote. You have probably failed on an epic proportion. What are we doing? I mean, it's just utterly ridiculous. And I'm a little bit lost, to be honest with you. Like, what would be your reasoning to even consider not giving him that option? I was thinking about that. Okay, well, you have A for why he should, and B is, have you figured it out? Because I have not. It's pretty brutal, to put it mildly. I don't think there's any reason that the NCAA should even consider it, let alone do it. I'm sorry. It's just really dumb. So with that, I'm going to talk about Jackson's talents here in just a minute. But again, I'm just dumbfounded by this. It doesn't make really any sense at all. The NCAA is gaining nothing, and they're making themselves look foolish, picking some funky rule over somebody's parent. That's crazy. Once again, thank you very much for making Locked On Seminoles your podcast each and every day. I truly appreciate it. It's great to have you here. I'm going to be doing Florida State podcasts each and every day. I really enjoy it. So please hit that notification bell, the like button. We can be found like Spotify, etc., wherever you get your podcasts. Definitely on YouTube. There's going to be times where honestly YouTube is a great option for you, because I'm going to show video that I personally take at football games across the state. Again, for those of you who haven't seen one of my podcasts, I'm a recruiting junkie, and that's not going to change. Florida State comparisons to LSU or to Florida or to Georgia or whatever players are going after, interviews, prospect breakdowns, class breakdowns, all that stuff. And then I will tie it in to games that are coming up, spring practice, etc. Recruiting is your lifeblood. In my opinion, it is 80% of who wins in college football. Look no further than the recruiting rankings. The teams at the top generally end up in the playoffs or released right there on the cusp. Florida State, by the way, is trending there. I've got a couple of interesting things coming up about the secondary, the defense, etc. they've got. But that's why I also did this podcast today, because it's a little bit of a prequel to the rest of the stuff about the week, because I think Florida State, while that may not be the 2012, 13, 14 area in terms of the defense yet, we got to see it. They're on the right track, and Daryl Jackson's a big part of that. So let's talk a little bit about Daryl in terms of what he's done. Last year, he was at the University of Miami, played 12 games. He had 27 tackles. 11 of those were solo. 16 were assisted. They rotated quite a bit. And he's 6'6", 300 pounds. Having a guy like that in the middle to be a run stuffer, he gets doubled a lot. So stats not necessarily the greatest, but he also had 4.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks in what was essentially his redshirt freshman year. Now, bigger, stronger, faster, and of course the NCAA needs to allow him to play for the Noles to have his services this year. It's a big deal because we're talking about a player that can, with the other guys that have like Fiske, if you put those two together, they have other young, and I'm not going to pick sides on who should or shouldn't be starting if Jackson does suddenly end up at Florida State for this season and able to play, not just on campus, but able to play. That'll take care of itself. I'll let Mike Norvell and his staff take care of that. But you're talking about a game-changing type physical presence in the middle of your line. Where does Alabama and where does Georgia make their hay more often than not? D-tackle / nose guard. Those 260, 280-pound guys playing strong side in, and then the defensive tackle and nose guard spots, depending on if they're in a 3-man, a 4-man, running a 50 front. They do a lot of different things because they're both 3-man teams. But Florida State can do some of those things too with Jackson. You can go 3-man with him at nose because he's so athletic, even at 6'6". Put an outside guy in a 7 technique and just let him come. If you don't double Jackson, that pocket's going to get pushed. He's a very talented young man. Florida State has a history with some of these incredible defensive tackles. That'll be the final segment. But I want to make a comparison to one of them. And I don't know. I mean, everybody's got their own opinion. Like, you could make a pretty strong argument. I don't know which one I would pick. It's actually a really good one. Ron Simmons, back in the day, I think he was at Florida State in 76 or 77. The first year Bowden was there, he was like a starter right away. He was an All-American. He helped Florida State to get to major bowl games. He was the start of the build. Then you had Odell Hagens out of Bartow. Simmons was Warner Robins up in Georgia. That area is always loaded. Timmy Jernigan, one of my favorite programs in Florida, etc. All these guys inside, when Florida State's good, they have them. Darrell could be that guy. And again, I'll get to them in more specifics of what I remember about them in segment 3. But if you can put him into the rotation and you add one more guy, just one more guy, especially in the back half of the schedule when you play, you got Florida and Miami, so you got rivalries. They're not up right now, but you've got teams on a given day. You never know. You have teams on your schedule that can, like Clemson, you have teams on your schedule, whether regular season and or in the postseason, maybe, it's North Carolina or somebody else. You're going to play a team that just has their day. The quarterback's hot. Of course, Drake May. That speaks for itself. And Florida State's in a league. ACC gets picked on, and I get it. There are a ton of quarterbacks. You need pressure up the middle. NC State, UNC, Duke, Miami. These teams all have quarterbacks that are at the very least, that are going to make it to the NFL as unrestricted free agents. And probably all of them are going to get drafted. Like Riley Leonard is going to be a great player. He's at Duke. If they ended up playing him in the ACC title game, who knows? He's the kind of guy that can carry you. Having that one more defensive tackle to at least slow down the run gives you a better chance. And for all the reasons I mentioned in segment 1, I mean, come on, man. He should be able to play. I'm going to keep coming back to it. It gets in my craw a little bit if you haven't already been able to tell. So here's what I also think. Florida State traditionally has been a 4-3 defense. And there's nothing wrong with that. I prefer it. It's pretty basic. It's easier to do, especially for college kids. The traditional quote-unquote 3-4 defense that you see Nick Saban, Kirby Smart run, and a handful of other teams try to run it too. There's a lot more moving parts. It's much more complex from a basic perspective. Of course, because everybody seems to want to use the spread now. No, not that it's not happening in Tallahassee as well. It's more complex. 4-2-5, you're going to see more 3-3-5, etc. But that second part there is where Jackson can get really, really difficult. You put him in what they call a zero technique. Head up on the nose. How many centers are really going to want to look up at Darrell and think they're going to make hay? That's a long day, brother. That is a long, long day. That changes your defense too. There are a lot of guys at Florida State that can play. We all know it. But when Florida State is good, really good, matter of fact, I might even pull up a stat here. They have a lot of history with interior defensive linemen. Let's look at Florida State here just for fun. Let's look at Florida State. I think it was 12, if I remember correctly, that the Noles really started, not that they weren't good on defense, but if you kind of looked at it and you said to yourself, well, what did they do nationally? Who did they compete with? I think the first thing you have to look at is run defense, because teams, even if you play the pass right, a really accurate pass usually wins, and teams know where the ball is going, et cetera, veteran quarterbacks, et cetera. If you look at Florida State 2012, rushing defense, Florida State was third in the nation. They gave up 91.9 yards per game. If you move next to 13, they won the national title. Florida State was good once again. Where are the Noles here? They were 18th. They gave up 124.8. So they were actually better in 12, but the offense obviously took off with a certain quarterback. And when you're in that realm, if you're under 150, you got a shot. If you're under 120, you're really good. They were right there on the cusp in 2013 and had Mr. Clutch at quarterback. I don't think you're going to really lose a lot of games. Florida State has that ability again. I think it's underrated not talking about Fiske more. I probably should here soon as well. The transfer out of Western Michigan, big body, can move. I think that could be as good a 1-2 punch as there is in the country. Again, if Jackson is allowed the waiver to play and the NCAA gets off its high horse here a little bit, I'm still a little bit shocked. Before we go to segment 3, I do want to make one mention, and this is just a pick. Maybe it's just because I liked him because of where he's from and everything else. My favorite Florida State defensive tackle historically, I could go a lot of ways. Timmy Jernigan, he's built differently than Darnell. I just wanted to throw this in. Lake City, Columbia, it's on the I-10 corridor, headed over towards Jacksonville. It's probably 50 minutes outside of Jacksonville, just west. That's one of my favorites. Another guy like him that was great, we're going to talk about in a second, is Corey Simon. But I think Jernigan would be my favorite. So everybody's got theirs. But Florida State's history since Bowden in the mid-'70s, you could make an argument that Florida State is the number one school in the country, legitimately, not only producing NFL players, which they've certainly done plenty, Dockett and all kinds of guys, but production actually in Tallahassee, big game production, being a part of top 10 defenses, etc. So that's something to think about before we go to this third segment. For Florida State to get back, they just need to be who they used to be again. Recruit your own backyard for the most part. Most of the guys I want to talk about here in a second were tremendous at doing that. So a little history, though, for segment 3, and this is kind of fun. Name the best player from the state of Florida that Bowden or anybody after him signed that ended up playing defensive tackle. I gave you a little hint there. There are different guys. One of them is still in Tallahassee in some capacity, Odell Hagens, around the program, obviously. Hagens came to Florida State from Bartow, Florida, not that far. I used to live there, actually. It's a town just outside of Lakeland, just south. Came to Florida State as a linebacker, got a little bigger. He's a strong guy. They ended up moving to D-line and then eventually nose guard, and he was very dominant. That was, Simmons was the first guy again. He's out of Warner Robins, but Florida State has had a history getting in-state D linemen that just get in the backfield. Hagens was a big part of that. Dockett is from Maryland. Man, he was a dude. 10 years, I believe it was with the Cardinals. Corey Simon, Philadelphia. He's a great player. He's from Pompano Beach, Blanche Ely, down in Broward. Broderick Bunkley, he's out of Chamberlain High School in Tampa. That is an absolute beast. Jernigan is my guy, and there's numerous others. That list is long. Eddie Goldman, Travis Johnson, Carl Simpson, numerous guys were really good for the Noles, but I just kind of wanted to mention them. And now I just want to break down a few things about what I think Florida State can do again with a little bit of recruiting mixed in with Florida State history at D tackle. Number one, Florida State has to get more kids like Corey Simon. And what do I mean by that? Not just get them, but it's where they get them from. He's from Florida. He's from South Florida, prominent program. Getting him means he didn't go to Miami. He didn't go to Florida. Didn't go to Auburn. Didn't go to Alabama. Didn't go to Georgia. He had offers from all kinds of programs. He decided to play for the Noles. That's a pretty big deal. Can they get more players like him out of South Florida, defensive guys? They've started to make some hay, and that's an important thing. And I don't know if anybody's seen it. Right before I did this podcast, somebody posted that Zaquan Patterson is announcing his decision on the 25th. Today is the 20th, so this coming Friday, that's a big deal. I don't know where Zay's going. I haven't talked to him this week. I just did a podcast about him. You can check it out on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, whatever you want. But Zay is going to announce he's a South Florida kid, and this is an example. Once you kind of get that trend, they got a kid from his high school, by the way, Chaminade last year, Joseph. Once you start that, you can get a handful. You don't have to beat Miami and Florida for every kid down there, but if Florida State can get 2 or 3 kids, like Corey Simon that came in and played early, started as like a sophomore, I believe it was a part of some great teams. If you can get guys like that out of South Florida to supplement, they always get kids out of South Georgia or an Atlanta kid every year that's a key player. This is no different under Norvell. If you can get 2 or 3 kids a year from South Florida, which is what Bowden usually did, he didn't go get 10. It's not realistic. But if you can get 2 or 3 really good ones, each class, Florida State can change the program. No question. It started, they got Hussey last year. They got Edwin Joseph. Guys out of key programs. Hussey is from STA, great kid, know him. Joseph, really talented player out of Chaminade. You're starting to get a few. They can get another guy that's a 5-star. Like Zaquan could open the door to a lot of things. So maybe even some more kids in this class too. You never know. Corey Simon, though, was a pure nose guard. One gap, get up the field, but he could root you out. Power player. Darnell Dockett, a little bigger bodied guy, little taller, more 3 technique, pure D tackle, but just powerful and athletic and could change direction. They got him out of Maryland. He was a national recruit. Every school in the country offered him. Everybody wanted him. It was a big get for Florida State when he signed with the Noles. Ron Simmons, I don't know how that went down. That was mid-70s. They don't really have recruiting stories, but he's from Warner Robins. Came in and played right away. That was obviously a different time for Florida State, but he helped build what Bobby Bowden had, and that makes a big difference. Timmy Jernigan, I already talked about. Odo Higgins is a great story because you've seen a lot of teams do this. Linebacker that moves and ends up playing D tackle. And then finally, Bunkley. He's just a purely powerful guy. And another guy that just so much athleticism in that frame. Changes how teams play against you. It's really, really, really difficult to go up against Florida State when they have those kind of D tackles. Because as we all know, it's not like it's hard to get DBs in this state and quick linebackers. That's never been a problem. That's not going to be. Florida State to get back, they need more of the big body D tackles. And again, to kind of wrap this up, Daryl Jackson, as of when I did this podcast, had not been cleared by the NCAA to play this season. I think it's a joke. They should let him play because it's about his mother. For crying out loud, let's get this right. NCAA let him play. Let's see this young man on the field for the Noles in 2023. So before I wrap up, please like this podcast. Please share it. Please make sure you promote it any way that you can. I greatly appreciate it. And above all else, for me, go ahead and comment something you want to discuss, even if it's not about something on this particular show. Give me a hint in the comments. Hey, I want to hear about who do you think is the best quarterback at Florida State since Charlie Ward? It could be all kinds of things. I'm happy to listen. There are many different things that we can add in to make a podcast better. We can talk about different subjects altogether. I could have 3 segments that are different. I like to tie them together, usually kind of lead one to the other, but it's fun to do that, but it doesn't have to be. If there's something I haven't talked about, or if you just have a question about a recruit, that's definitely my area. Please let me know. I'm more than happy to do that because it's just fun to talk football. And by the way, we're only a little over a week from college football. It's less than 2 2 weeks will like be full bore into college football. So that's great. So once again, everybody, thank you very much. I will talk to you very soon.